I've spent a lot of time lately studying the doors, stairs, and walls in TF2. So much, in fact, that I'm running out of things to look at. So I jumped over to CS2, which uses the CS2 engine, and started looking there. And right away, I found something. A window. Now, this isn't any ordinary window. As I move around it, the curtains appear as though they're behind the glass. But if I no-clip through it, they're not. What is this wizardry? As it turns out, these magic windows are everywhere on Inferno in Italy and come in different shapes and sizes that I've laid out here in Hammer. If I shift right-click on one of them, the texture shows up in the bottom right corner as my active material. But I want to see how it works, so if I right-click on the model and go to Assets under Mouse, I can open up the glass material in what's called the Material Editor, which is unique to the CS2 engine and allows you to configure and preview materials using common file formats in real time through an intuitive UI. A huge step up from the text-based VMTs and VTFs we have to work with in CS1. In the upper left-hand corner, it says CSGO's simple 3-layer parallax, and at the center, when I scroll down, are several different texture maps associated with the 3 layers. This information alone shows how this window is rendered. What's going on here is something called parallax mapping, or at the very least, something similar. You see, parallax mapping is a rendering technique that mimics how an object would look if it were 3D. It doesn't create any real depth or deform the object like a displacement map does, but it uses the same information. Why? Well, because rendering a deformed surface takes a lot more computing power than a flat one. And in a game like Counter-Strike where you have a million things rendered at once, you need to be able to run around and play the game with at least 60 frames per second. This simply wouldn't be possible if everything was deformed with displacement maps. In fact, the CS2 engine doesn't even support this, but most of the time it looks like it does. When you think about it, and how all sorts of different texture and rendering techniques are used to make rendering beautiful scenes like this in real time possible, is actually quite amazing. But this 3-layer parallax shader is different than parallax mapping as I know it because it has 3 slots for 3 different textures and the ability to mask out certain parts. How Valve created this is beyond me, but I can explain how these 3 layers form this window and show a couple of other cool things you can do with this shader that we've yet to see added to the game. Starting at the top, there's this concrete texture selected as the color map, which corresponds with the surface of the window. Come to think of it, I don't know why Valve is using a concrete texture for a window, but let's just roll with it. You can think of this as layer 0. Next, we have the normal and roughness maps. I'm skipping the tint and ambient occlusion maps since they're not used here. Now, contrary to what you see, there is in fact a custom normal map. We can see it if I click on this folder icon and disable naming conventions. It's right here. But when I select it, it doesn't show up in this display. I don't know why this happens, but it's there. And just to confirm, if I delete it, all of the detail in the middle of the window disappears. Alright, so moving on to the roughness map, this controls how shiny the window is and adds all of this dirt and grime. Without it, the surface of the window wouldn't even look like glass. Now we have the cool stuff, the parallax layers, which are layers 0, 1, and 2. Like I said earlier, layer 0 is the color map up at the top and has a mask here that controls which parts are visible. If it was completely white, you'd only see the concrete, and if it was completely black, you wouldn't see any of it. In this case, it's only masked in the middle to reveal the inner parts of the curtain. Now, you can't see from this flat view, but the parallax effect allows us to see more of the layers underneath as we change our perspective. Layer 1 is the actual curtains, and in the middle here, there appears to be a real-life window frame in front of some trees, which leads me to believe that this texture was created off of a real-life photo. Anyway, the center bit doesn't matter because it's masked out, which leaves us with the final layer at the very back, which is just a gray gradient made to represent a dark room. So these are all of the texture maps that make up this parallax shader, but there's one more thing I want to show you here that's super cool. If I switch over to this cube view so that the window is oriented vertically and drag these offset sliders, I can control how close together these 3 layers appear. For example, if I want the curtains to appear farther away, I can drag the slider to the left. Or if I want them to appear closer, I can slide it to the right. The same goes with layer 2, but because it's relatively empty, it isn't as noticeable. Instead, you can select an emissive color and increase the strength to give the illusion of a lit room, which looks awesome, and many of the windows in Italy use this. So that's how most of these windows appear 3D in CS2. There are two other window materials that use this shader, the first being this one, which is just an arch without any curtains, and this one, which is rather subtle and only found in this building. But the application of this parallax shader stretches beyond just windows, and the best example I have to show this is with ice. Here, I have 3 different textures layered on top of each other, with the top 2 layers masked out at about 50%, which creates this incredible effect in-game that makes it look like you're walking on top of an ice sheet. I can control the thickness with the offset sliders and add some emission to simulate caustics. I also tried using this shader on non-transparent materials, like this brick wall, but because we're limited to 3 layers, I haven't figured out a way to make it look convincing. Doing a bit of research, I came across this video by 8byte where he demonstrated this effect on a tile roof, but even with those project files, I was experiencing the same thing as with the brick wall. He did manage to create a convincing balcony though, which brings me to the following conclusion. You should only use the 3-layer parallax shader when trying to simulate depth behind a semi or completely transparent surface bounded by solid geometry on all sides. You can't use it in the traditional sense because you're limited to only 3 layers without any kind of interpolation algorithm for filling in the spaces in between. But in some cases, as Valve have demonstrated with the windows on Italy and Inferno, the 3-layer setup is more than enough. Thank you for watching. This is LED switching off.